Chapter 576. Fujio wanted to say that she had never given up on her principles. But at this time, the more he said, the more mistakes he would make. He could only remain silent. Too much time had passed. It was so long that she thought she would definitely be handed over to the police. Chinemo spoke again, his voice cold. If you don't want anyone to know about this, break up with your girlfriend. Fujio looked up, her thin lips slightly open. It's obvious that her existence isn't beneficial to you. Chinemo didn't give Fujio a chance to speak. He walked towards the youngster, and his eyes darkened. It's not good for the National League. Think carefully about what's important. After Chinemo said this, his tone softened. Come home with me now. A closed environment is better for your thinking. Fujio raised her eyebrows. Was the Almighty planning to take care of her personally? Not letting her go home, not handing her over to the police. He probably still had some doubts. But going back with the Almighty at this hour meant that she would have to sleep in his house. Fujio paused. She knew that it wasn't wise to reject him now. Fortunately, she was wearing women's clothing this time, and had bandages wrapped around her chest. Otherwise, the Almighty would be suspicious of her identity from that brief encounter just now. Fujio was very clear that what she needed to do now was to maintain a newbie's attitude. She could have hacking skills, but she couldn't use them to do these things. She had to act naive. Hence, she basically followed him wherever he asked her to go. The man next to her was driving at a much faster speed than before. From the rearview mirror, he could still see the police car speeding past. It seemed like the Almighty really didn't want to hand her over to the police. But this time, the Almighty didn't bring her to the place she was familiar with. Brother Emo, what's this? Fujio looked up at the duplex buildings in front of her. Chinemo pressed the car key, his gaze deep. My own place. No, Brother Emo, you didn't find such a desolate place to lock me up, did you? Fujio said this, but she put her arm directly on Chinmo's shoulder. She had a handsome and evil smile on her face, and she didn't seem to be unfamiliar at all. Chinemo tilted his head and smiled faintly. What do you think? Fujio. Oh no, it was really possible. It was too late to escape now. Go in. Chinemo pressed his fingers on Fujio's back and pushed her forward. He didn't use much strength, but it gave off an invisible sense of danger. Fujio's eyes couldn't adapt to the darkness. It's so dark. Chinemo looked at the person in front of him, and suddenly bent down. Fujio's breathing quickened, and her eyes unconsciously fell on the Almighty's thin lips. Just turning on the lights. Chinemo put his hand on the wall behind Fujio. After sensing Fujio's gaze, he curled his lips into a mocking smile. What do you think I'm going to do? It's nothing. Fujio smiled without changing her expression. She looked at the handsome face in front of her that was exposed under the light without changing her expression. He was very close to her, and his breath was a little disturbing. Did she get kissing syndrome? When the Almighty lowered his head, she thought. Chapter 577. Her blood would flow differently when it came into contact with the coldness. Especially the blood flow to her heart. It seemed to slow down over time. Fujio tilted her head to avoid the fingertips that were disturbing her thoughts, but she still felt his breath on her lips. She rubbed it with the back of her hand and smiled. A little, Brother Emo. You always use your charm on me. Be careful, I might turn gay and ask you to take responsibility. Hearing that, Chinmo's eyes deepened, but he still maintained that posture. Then take responsibility. Locking you up is just right. Fujio, are you serious? The Almighty had sacrificed so much just to interrogate her. How are you going to ask me to take responsibility? Chinemo raised his eyebrows, gesturing for the person in front of him to continue. She was just saying it casually, she hadn't thought it through. Chinemo saw through her thoughts with one look, and his eyes turned cold. He moved his left hand and lowered it a little. Hug. Kiss. Or sleep? The man turned his face sideways, his breath and voice carrying a different kind of bewitchment. It was probably because the Almighty had such a strong sense of abstinence, so when he got involved with evil, he was like a demon that could confuse one's soul. This kind of interrogation was really unbearable. Fujio knew the hidden danger in that voice, so she took the initiative to admit her mistake. I don't dare to ask Brother Mo to take responsibility. It's my fault this time. Chin Mo raised his eyebrows, but he didn't move. Actually, I was hesitant when I planned it. Fujio looked up, her eyes bright. But I had no choice, someone had to expose it, otherwise Chin Mo interrupted the youngster indifferently, as if he didn't want to hear that name. She could have asked the police for protection. Do you not trust the police that much? To be honest, a little. Fujio admitted it without hesitation because she knew she couldn't hide it from the Almighty. Chin Mo retracted his hand and looked at her. That's why you imitated Z's crime. Yes. Fujio's eyes flashed. As expected, the Almighty was suspicious, but no matter how smart he was, he couldn't have guessed that Z had been reborn, which was why he always thought she was imitating. Why did she feel that other than the fact that she had been reborn, she was better than the Almighty in every other aspect? Luckily, Fujio had already prepared an excuse for this. After talking to Brother Mo that day, I went to look up Z's information, and found out that she had handled a similar case before. That case inspired me to a certain extent, and that's how I came up with the next plan. Even if it's a hacker, the first case he starts would be because something happened to someone important to him. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Chin Mo asked calmly. Fujio's fingers paused. The Almighty had even found out what was the first case she was involved in her previous life? As expected of an opponent like the Almighty, as soon as he encountered it, he had to adjust all his thoughts to face it. He had never felt this evenly matched before. Now that she had met him, it had stimulated her competitive spirit. But there was one thing. In the future, when the Almighty used his charm on her, she had to hold on. She couldn't be easily bewitched. I want to explain. Fujio looked into Chin Mo's eyes. Why did you make a move before the National League? She knew that the National League was very important to the Almighty. Not only to the Almighty, but to everyone in the Supreme Alliance. Chapter 578. Chin Mo's eyes dimmed, replying. So the National League and Li Mengran, which one is the most important to you? It was a multiple-choice question. Fujio couldn't figure out the thoughts of people in love. For instance, if she was really in a relationship with Li Mengran, she would definitely reply that Li Mengran was the most important. But Fujio didn't want to lie. The National League. Fujio added. But you know Li Mengran is my girlfriend. Chin Mo arched a brow. There isn't a girlfriend more important than the National League. At least for now. Fujio felt that the Almighty's aura wasn't as cold as before. Chin Mo replied faintly. Then it isn't that important. It is important. Fujio wanted to let the Almighty know that she had a reason for taking action. Chin Mo didn't speak, but his eyes dimmed again. Then he took off his jacket and threw it on the sofa, leaving only his white shirt on. He rolled up his sleeves and looked at Fujio with his hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything, but his warning was very strong. Fujio wasn't stupid. Noticing the change in the Almighty's gaze, she immediately kept quiet. Just this once. Chin Mo walked closer, his gaze deep beneath his long lashes. If there's a next time, I'll lock you up personally. Fujio believed him, but from his words he seemed to have accepted her excuse. Indeed, becoming Li Mengran's boyfriend was a solid excuse. The police would probably talk to Li Mengran. She was only worried about one thing. She hadn't expected to be caught by the Almighty. Hence she couldn't make any calls. The last step of her plan was to tell Li Mengran not to tell the police about the other party. It wasn't that there would be any danger, but it was inevitable that the police would come to question her. Just as Fujio was deep in her thoughts, she heard a deep and familiar voice. How long do you intend to wear this female outfit for? Fujio lifted her lids, meeting the Almighty's calm gaze. The Almighty frowned slightly, as though he didn't like the way she was acting. Fujio understood that a straight man wouldn't be able to accept a man in female clothing. The Almighty was just too straight. However, she wasn't sure. It wasn't that Chin Mo was too straightforward, but the way the person in front of him cross-dressed always made him want to do something extreme. Just like before he brought the youngster in. He had thought of too many ways to punish the young man. One of them was to obtain the young man. But he knew very well that once he did that, The two of them would never be able to go back. That was why he stopped. Unfortunately, a certain someone always appeared in front of him like this, without any self-awareness. I'll change it when I get home. Fujio saw the Almighty looking at her, and she understood what he was trying to say. It was better not to dress up in front of the Almighty in the future, or it would remind him of those 2 kisses. Chin-emo tugged his collar open and turned his head. Did I say you could go home? Fujio. Was he really going to sleep here? Chapter 579. Fujio took off the sweater that was covering her eyes and didn't say anything. After all, it was safer to change back into men's clothes than women's. She didn't need to worry too much about the bandage on her chest. But if she was going to sleep with the Almighty again, she had to think of an extra layer of protection. So Fujio didn't take off her singlet. But for her, the Almighty's clothes were a bit too big. Especially the sweater. The sleeves had to be rolled up 3 times. Chin-emo turned around with his glass in hand, and saw the youngster in this state. He was still pulling up his pants, and his face under his silver short hair looked a little depressed, like a child who had stolen an adult's clothes. He leaned against the side unruffled. Fujio looked up, and saw that the Almighty had no intention of helping at all. She curled her thin lips. This shirt is too big for me. Now you know you are short? Chin-emo took a sip of wine and said slowly, ceiling scholar. Fujio's feet slipped, and she almost fell. Could the Almighty change his bad habit of giving random nicknames? Chin-emo looked down at his lit-up phone screen. Do you have an answer to the thing I asked you to think about? That thing. Fujio pulled up her long sleeves. Which thing? Seeing this, Chin-emo put down his glass and walked over. He pulled the youngster's arm and rolled up his sleeves for her. His side profile was handsome and indifferent. Break up. He enunciated each word in a calm voice. Fujio finally remembered that there was such a thing. But she couldn't agree too quickly, or she would expose herself. So she lowered her head and didn't speak. Chin-emo stopped with a faint smile. Why? Can't bear to part with you? This is my first love in name. Fujio was telling the truth. Brother Emo, I've confessed so many times, but this is the only time I've succeeded. Chin-emo tightened his grip. You know how many times you have confessed to me? Fujio paused. How could she mention it? This wasn't something to be proud of. Anyway, it's my first time. Give me some time. This answer shouldn't be wrong. Chin-emo paused and said in a deep voice, one day. What? Fujio looked up. Chin-emo continued to roll up the youngster's other sleeve. The curve of his face didn't reveal any emotions. I'll only give you 1 day. Listen carefully, this is the limit. Fujio didn't speak immediately. Chin-emo didn't know how many times he had experienced this feeling today. The worry of hearing rejection. Worry? Since when did he have such inexplicable emotions? It wasn't that he didn't feel guilty. She used this as leverage to make the young man break up with her. It was just that he couldn't stand the fact that this guy belonged to a girl. Since it wasn't that important, then he would completely uproot it. Don't give anything a chance to sprout. This time he had learned his lesson. In the future, the youth would only have him by his side. All right. Fujio tried her best to show her emotions, and even her voice was hoarse. I will try my best to forget. Chin-emo glanced at the head that was lowered, the fluffy silver hair swirling around it. He got the answer he wanted. However, he was not in a good mood. Because Chin-emo realized that if it was possible, he didn't want the youngster to be so disappointed. Chapter 580. I want to be alone. Fujio continued to pretend. Go home and think about how to ask Mengran tomorrow. After all, I'm the one who wants to be with you. As soon as the words left her mouth, the temperature in the room was a bit low. Chin-emo didn't say anything. Just when Fujio thought she had gotten his consent, she turned to leave. Chin-emo reached out his hand and pressed it against the door frame, blocking Fujio's way. He bent his back and lowered his head to get close to her face. A warm breath fell on Fujio's ear again, and she felt an indescribable numbness. I said I'm tired today. Chin-emo paused, and his tone carried a trace of indecipherable emotion. Is it that bad? Of course, Fujio nodded. A little. Then drink some wine. Chinemo pulled the youngster back. I'll stay with you. Fujio felt that she was one step behind again. She never thought that the Almighty would remember that he was her brother at this time. Anyway, she couldn't leave this time. The two of them opened a bottle of red wine. Fujio didn't drink much. The most important thing was to stay sober. Indeed, there was only one room here. The Almighty didn't even give her a chance to say that she wanted to sleep on the sofa. His eyes were indifferent. You don't dare to sleep with me? What are you afraid of? Brother Mo, why do I feel that you are going to watch me 24 hours a day? Fujio wasn't stupid. The Almighty wasn't like this for no reason. Chinemo tilted his head and lit a cigarette. Then he took out his phone, unlocked it, and threw it to the person in front of him. Fujio looked at the message on the screen, and her eyes suddenly widened. There was only one line, no more, no less. Tomorrow at 8 in the morning, Z will take action. Fujio raised her eyebrows. The Almighty still hadn't completely dispelled his suspicion towards her. Stay here tonight. Chinemo looked up. I won't be watching you 24 hours a day. Fujio smiled lightly. Okay, for my freedom in the future. This was indeed a chance to clear her name. But what did the person pretending to be her want to do? Fujio knew that the Almighty wouldn't say more. It was already extra that he let her read the message. But sleeping in the same room, on the same bed, was different from before. When the lights were turned off and the room was plunged into darkness, Fujio could still see the outline of her surroundings clearly through the moonlight. Fujio couldn't fall asleep even though she was fully clothed. How should he put it? Kissing and not kissing were indeed different. Fujio always felt that as soon as that familiar scent approached, the man's eyes when he kissed her lips would appear in her mind. It was very deep, like the sea. With this thought in mind, it was inevitable that he would want to retreat. His lips hadn't healed yet, so when the tip of his tongue slid across, he could feel a fine line on the wound. It's a little itchy. As Fujio thought about it, she moved back a little. Suddenly, the lights turned on. A tall shadow flipped over and loomed over Fujio's head. That oppressive sense of danger came again. The Almighty's breath was right above her, gently sprinkling down. Fujio felt an indescribable dizziness for the first time. The Almighty was looking at her at such a close distance that when their eyes met, she felt a chill run down her spine. Fujio had to face it head-on. Chapter 581. It's itchy, the weather is cold, and it's hard to get better. Plus today. Fujio didn't finish her sentence, mainly because it was too embarrassing. After being kissed twice, there were still marks left. Chinemo reached out his hand, wanting to touch it with his fingertips. What kind of joke was this, such a position? Fujio sat up directly, otherwise it would be too ambiguous. But in the end, she realized that after she sat up, the position was even more ambiguous. She didn't know what the Almighty was thinking, but the mirror was on the left side of the bed. Fujio tilted her head, just in time to see the two of them in the mirror. That incomparably handsome man had his knees against the bedsheets, his hands on both sides of her, his upper body close to hers, his shirt collar half open, revealing his muscular chest, his voice low and deep. What now? Why don't you say it? Whether from his posture or his appearance, the Almighty's aura was too strong. Fujio didn't speak again, because she felt that a lot of inappropriate images would appear in her head just by looking at that scene. It was all because the Almighty was too handsome. That kind of abstinence could easily make people think the wrong way. He seemed to notice Fujio's gaze. Chinemo tilted his head and followed her line of sight. In the mirror, the youngster was trapped under him. The collar of the pure white shirt was slightly askew, revealing a beautiful and delicate collarbone. His skin was white and clean, his thin lips were slightly open, and his eyes were even a little watery because of surprise. Chinmo's eyes deepened when he saw that scene. In fact, whether the youngster was wearing women's or men's clothes, it didn't seem to affect his feelings towards this guy. If he wanted to tear off all his clothes, it would be best if he could leave his mark on every inch of this guy's body. Not just his lips, but also his ears, neck, collarbone, and any other place that could be left. How strange, he clearly had the same body structure as him. But he couldn't stop that thought. He wanted this guy's legs to wrap around his waist, and he wanted to hear the youngster begging for mercy. Just like what he had thought before entering the room. He wanted to get this person and make him completely his. The sweet smell of the youngster's candy seemed to be urging him to do this. Even his blood was restless. He had already tasted the youngster, so he wanted more. But Chinemo knew that once he did it, he would lose everything. Hence, he moved his palm slowly through the youngster's sweater, dragging her back inch by inch. If you don't sleep, I don't mind throwing you out of the window. I'll show your fans that their beloved little spade not only knows how to scale walls and ceilings, he can also inhale smog. Or perhaps, I can teach you something else like training your kissing skills enrich. When she felt the warm breath getting closer and closer to her lips, Fujio realized that the textbooks were right. She had to avoid men with excessive hormones. Although the Almighty wasn't gay, what if he saw her too handsome and wanted to hit her? She definitely couldn't suppress him. I'll sleep. Fujio tilted her head seriously, opened her eyes and added, "Good night, brother Emo." Chinemo lowered his head, a look of silent patience flashing across his deep eyes. The youth didn't see her patience behind the black light. Chapter 582. Fujio heard the vibrating sound beside her. When she looked over, Chinemo had already walked out of the room with his phone in his hand. The call was from Director Huang. His voice was a little deep. "This case is a little hard to determine. If you have time, come to the police station tomorrow." "Got it." Chinemo hung up and glanced at the youngster. He didn't walk back and chose to sleep on the sofa. The next day, 8 o'clock. Z on the internet took action as expected. It was just that the result was somewhat unexpected. The maiden's sacrifice in the trailer didn't appear. But some of the images that were exposed still left the police in a terrible state. Fujio didn't have a deep sleep last night. When she woke up, she saw the news on TV. Chinemo sat on the sofa and pressed the remote control with his fingertips. His tone was indifferent. "The person you are imitating seems to be aiming at the same thing as you." Fujio raised her eyebrows. "Brother Emo, are you talking about that? See? What do you think the maiden's sacrifice in the trailer is talking about?" Chinemo didn't answer her question. Fujio sat down. "I just woke up and you are testing me again? It's a case analysis." Chinemo placed his hand on the youngster's head. "You are 80% free of suspicion. Are you happy?" That casual tone, was he really coaxing a child? Or was it just a perfunctory coaxing? Fujio suggested. "Can't you find the remaining 20%? It's 25% now." Chinemo stood up. His side profile was handsome, and even his button-up posture was full of abstinence. "I don't like to bargain." Fujio. Inexplicably, it increased by 5%. "Go wash up and follow me to the police station." Chinmo's voice sounded again. It was deep. Fujio was already standing in the bathroom. She lowered her head and squeezed some toothpaste. When she looked up, she met the man's eyes in the mirror. "What are we going to do?" "Get rid of your 20% suspicion." Chinemo was leaning against the door frame. When the youngster brushed his teeth, he saw that the youngster seemed to avoid his upper lip. He frowned and walked over. He took the youngster's toothbrush and pinched his chin with one hand. "Open your mouth." There were still bubbles in Fujio's mouth, but she didn't think that it would affect her handsomeness. "I've never asked anyone to brush my teeth for me. Even when I was young. I couldn't reach the sink, so I moved a stool and stood on it to brush my teeth. Do I need to praise you for being smart and buy you candy?" Chinemo arched his eyebrows. Compared to the pressure, his movements were more gentle. "Don't talk, go drink some water." Fujio was very obedient at this time. She basically followed the Almighty's instructions. As the water entered his throat, it made a gurgling sound. At that moment, it was as if the first rays of dawn had become as gentle as water. Chinemo had always known that the youngster had good skin. However, when the sun shone down on him, the skin on the side of his face was like white jade. His fingertips could still feel the softness and smoothness. He thought that he had really turned completely gay, because it didn't matter what this guy looked like. He seemed to be starting to lose control of himself. The desire to possess him grew stronger and stronger. It was so strong that when he smelled the youth's aura, his fingers would heat up. But now was not the time to unleash the beast in his heart. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be friends. Chapter 583. At 9 a.m., at the entrance of the police station, there was an unprecedented number of media outlets waiting for news. I heard that someone has released news on the internet that they will be one step ahead of the police and find all the people involved in this case. Director Huang, is this true? There are also people who say it's a power exchange. High school students aren't incapable of distinguishing between right and wrong. Why did they agree to it? Is it because of the benefits? Where's the victim? Director Huang wasn't in a position to answer. Could the victim come out and say a few words? Fujio frowned as she listened to the questions. She buttoned up her cap, entering the police station from the side door with the almighty. If Qin Mo's face were to appear in front of the media, it would definitely cause a commotion. Director Huang understood that, hence, he had arranged for someone to wait at a designated location. The moment Qin Mo entered, he rushed over. It's a troublesome matter, the victim. With that, Director Huang paused, turning towards Fujio. This is my brother. Qin Mo's voice was calm. Speak, the media is already in a frenzy, nothing can be kept a secret. Director Huang wanted to ask when he had a brother, but it wasn't the right time to ask. He glanced at Qin Mo, lowering his voice. The victim's family is here. It seemed like the problem was with the victim's family. The intelligent Qin Mo instantly understood Director Huang's intentions. The two of them followed Director Huang into the lounge. Li Menggran wasn't the only one sitting there. Her mother was there as well. She seemed to be in a daze, unable to accept the sudden turn of events. Wu Zhen sat at the side, taking down the statement as though she was making a final confirmation. You're saying that Teacher Yang has always been nice to your daughter? When Fujio heard this question, her hands, which were hidden under her sleeves, started to move. Her eyes turned very dark. Little Wu. Director Huang walked over. Didn't I tell you not to take a statement for now? Wu Zhen hadn't slept the entire day and was exhausted. Just as her face was about to sink, she caught sight of Qin Mo, her voice turning hoarse. A bunch of media outlets are waiting for the outcome of this case. Director Huang, we have dragged this for too long. We have to give everyone an explanation. Besides, the public has the right to know. The public? Li Mengran's mother seemed to have woken up. You mean to tell everyone about this? Wu Zhen comforted him. This is normal procedure. To file a case for investigation, the victim must file a lawsuit. When did we say we were going to sue? Li Mengran's mother stood up agitatedly. If this gets out, how is my daughter going to stay in school? The neighbors will start gossiping, wondering why I have such a daughter. Haven't you considered the consequences? Why do you have to make it public? No one noticed. While she was saying this sentence, Li Mengran's eyes dimmed. Perhaps she should have listened to that person and left last night. In that case, people would always remember that she died to show her determination. Not like now, facing countless cameras and people's curiosity and speculation, as well as her mother's reaction. Auntie. Chapter 584. The main point isn't what you're saying. The youngster's handsome face reflected the light from the window. The main point is how you're going to protect your daughter when she's being bullied. Motherly paused, her expression turning ugly. What do you mean by this? Does an outsider have the right to listen in? Where's the privacy of the commoners? Director Huang didn't know how to reply. Wu Zhen was professional, glancing at Qin Mo before turning to the youngster. Those unrelated to the case, please leave, don't disturb us. Qin Mo furrowed his brows. Fujio laughed, her lips curling into a mischievous smile. Who says I'm unrelated to the case? The victim is my girlfriend. As an unofficial family member, please record a statement for me. Wu Zhen gulped. Motherly glanced at Li Menggran before turning to Fujio, her chest heaving. She took a deep breath. My decision is to protect my daughter. You're all too young, you don't understand gossip. No one wishes for such a thing to happen. Fortunately, nothing happened to Menggran, and I trust the police. Even if my daughter didn't stand up for them, they would still be locked up. Didn't they expose their crimes on the live stream? In less than a year, you'll be taking your college entrance exams. If this matter blows up, it would definitely affect Mengran, so we don't intend to press charges. She said the last sentence with great difficulty. Her decision caused the room to sink into silence. After that, Qin Mo's voice was clear and cold. Whether to press charges or not is up to the victim, not the victim's family. Li Mingran's eyes were still on Fujio, the youngster standing under the sunlight. Li Xiqing's mother pulled her hand. Her meaning was clear. Li Mingran inhaled deeply, swallowing the words that were so bitter it hurt. In the end, she chose to submit. Yes, we don't intend to press charges. In that instant, Li Mingran was afraid of seeing disappointment in the youngster's eyes. But she wasn't. That person looked at her. His gaze was as gentle and clear as water, just like in the past. Humans would always tolerate everything for the sake of those important to them, even if it was a heart-wrenching grievance. Hence, regardless of Li Mingran's decision, Fujio would support them. Mother Li also felt bad. She pressed her daughter's hand and said, "I'm sorry." All parents love their children. It was just that they were all different. If it were her, even if He Honghua had to spend all her money and suffer all the finger-pointing, she would still fight for her. It was obvious that Mother Li was still afraid of something in her heart, so she didn't dare to say anything. Fujio had already considered that when she first started her plan. Li Mingran's father's unit was just below Deputy Lu. There was nothing wrong with doing so. Perhaps, as Mother Li said, they were still too young to understand what it meant to be a fearful person. Li Mingran had a long road ahead of her. If this matter was really exposed, she would have to bear this label for the rest of her life. Fujio had to admit that this was the reality. That was why so many people chose not to say anything, not because they were weak, but because they wanted to live a good life. Chapter 585. Fujio's eyes darkened as she watched Li Mingran's bent back. At that moment, it was as if something in the depths of his heart was about to collapse. If it wasn't for the penetrating voice behind him, he would have been dead. Perhaps it would really turn completely black. There's no need to sue. Let's go through the public prosecution process. Fujio looked back and saw that Qin Mo had unbuttoned his shirt collar with his fingers. He had a pen in his hand and was ticking off another statement. His eyes were deep. The public prosecution will not reveal the victim's information, and there will be no public hearings. As for those scumbags who hurt you, I will make sure they will never get out of prison. Hearing this, Li Mingran's body shook. If I don't see that scene, I won't be able to rest in peace. Am I right? Qin Mo lifted his head, his thin lips moving slightly. The maiden's sacrifice. Li Mingran was stunned, looking at the legendary Almighty Qin in disbelief. Young Master Qin. How do you know my forum ID? No, I didn't know it was a forum ID. Qin Mo's voice was still calm. I just guessed that these words might have something to do with you. I've studied psychology, so what I'm going to say next might be very direct. It's not a good idea to use death to prove one's sincerity. Your family, and those who aren't your family, will be very sad. Fujio's name was called out without any warning. Qin Mo continued. Yesterday, I asked him to break up with you and he cried the entire night. Fujio. This morning, he called for my brother and asked me to bring him to you. Qin Mo's tone was indifferent. Those who didn't understand would really believe it. Mother Li started to look towards Fujio. Director Huang looked as though he hadn't expected high school students to be so infatuated with each other. Only Li Mingran knew that was impossible. Seeing the youth's dazed expression, she laughed. I didn't expect me to be so important to him. Qin Mo replied calmly. It's very important, but it's only for today. He will break up with you tomorrow. Enjoy it. Hey. Fujio raised her eyebrows. Brother Mo, shouldn't I be the one to break up with him? I'll give you the chance now. Qin Mo crossed his arms in front of his chest, looking handsome and noble. Go ahead. Fujio continued to raise her eyebrows. For some reason, Li Mingran felt much more at ease upon seeing this. It was probably because the two of them were standing together. Every word they said seemed to be unintentional, but in fact, they were trying to enlighten her. Or that sentence, "I will make sure that they will never be able to get out of prison." It gave her a great shock. In fact, they were obviously two people with different styles, but their worldviews were very similar, right? Mengran. Fujio walked towards the girl who was still standing there. Everyone thought that it was just an ordinary breakup. Unexpectedly, the young man suddenly stretched out his arms and pulled her into his embrace. Even Chin-mo hadn't expected this. Therefore, when Fujio made this move, Chin-mo's hand, which had been twirling his pen, stopped. On the other hand, Lee Mingran's eyes overflowed with joy because of this hug. Chapter 586. Not far away, Chin-mo watched as the two of them hugged. He couldn't help but tighten his grip on the pen. He thought it would only take a while. But when the youngster turned over, whispering into Lee Mingran's ear, that scene prompted Chin-mo to take action. Lee Mingran nodded, but before she could say the word okay, she felt the youngster's arm being pulled away. It was Chin-mo. He was still holding on to the youngster's wrist, with no intention of letting go. His voice was deep and pleasant. "Take care." It was obvious he wanted to send her off. Lee Mingran paused, breaking into a smile. This time she really walked out. After she left, Chin-mo glanced over, his tone cold. Chin-mo tilted his head, his tone slightly cold. "I asked you to break up. I didn't ask you to rekindle your old feelings. It's because we're breaking up. That's why I had to hug you," Fujio replied seriously. "Otherwise, how would I be able to justify crying the entire night yesterday?" Chin-mo arched a brow. "So that hug was to shut me up and not because you couldn't bear to?" "Both." Fujio hadn't forgotten that she had just broken up with her boyfriend. Chin-mo repeated slowly. "All of them? Seems like it isn't unimportant. That's why I want to know how to proceed with the prosecution." Fujio glanced at Chin-mo. The importance in the youngster's eyes was clear. Chin-mo was filled with jealousy. That was right, he was jealous. He had thought about it countless times. If he had discovered the youngster's feelings earlier, he would have been able to stop it. But in the end, the seed was planted, wasn't it? "You don't have to interfere, you've already done so much. Just bring me the evidence you found. Don't forget, you're still a 20% suspect." Chin-mo's gaze was still calm. Fujio lowered her voice. "It really wasn't me. Other than the hacker forum, I haven't been on any other forums. You can get Fatty to check my search history. Honestly, I suspect there's something wrong with the forum. I will." Chin-mo only gave the youngster 2 words. Fujio knew from Lee Mingran's words. She wasn't the only one who had caught on to the forum ID. The Almighty was also collecting evidence. That was why the Almighty was so frightening. He was clearly comforting someone, but at the same time, he was able to obtain information. That kind of innate bookworm instinct was very powerful. This made Fujio want to take the Almighty home and raise him. Deep in thought, Fujio didn't notice that Chin-mo's hand had been holding her wrist without loosening. But Chin-mo noticed it, and caught Director Huang's curious gaze. But so what? It was easy for Chin-mo to pretend he didn't see it. Even if there was a seed in one's heart, it would not sprout if there was no water. Moreover, from now on, this person would only belong to him. With one hand in his pocket, and the other holding the youngster's hand, he walked into the interrogation hall. His indifferent expression made Director Huang feel as though he was overthinking things. Wasn't it just holding hands after whispering to each other? This was very normal. Director Huang tried his best to convince himself since the case was more important. However, there was one person who he could not convince. That was Wu Zhen. Although that person did not reveal any of his emotions, but she saw his right hand gripping the pen tightly. In an instant, Wu Zhen recalled the CP topics on the internet. Chapter 587. Call your bureau chief over. The 2 men locked up didn't know about the live stream. Hence, Deputy Liu felt that with his influence, he would be able to turn the matter into a small one. But it was a pity he was facing Chin-mo. This deputy Lu had just been transferred over, so he didn't know young Master Qin. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such an attitude. Deputy Lu glanced at the interrogator, his fingers almost touching the man's face. You must have just graduated. You can't make decisions on my matters, someone else. Fujio stood at the side, thinking that Deputy Lu wouldn't survive the night. Of all people, he had provoked the Almighty. Qin Mo's expression didn't change. He lowered his head and wrote a few words, reminding him calmly, Deputy Lu, this is the police station. Deputy Lu chuckled. Of course I know this is the police station. Let me ask you, do you know who I am? Qin Mo swept him a glance and knocked on the table, gesturing for the person beside him to record. Seeing this, Deputy Lu narrowed his eyes and took a step back. I won't say anything before my lawyer arrives. Then you can rest assured that your private lawyer won't be able to come. Qin Mo placed his pen down, his side profile handsome. With that, Deputy Lu felt a sense of unease. It was probably because of the other party's aura. Deputy Lu couldn't help but ask, I request to speak to my lawyer. The two police officers who were taking notes looked at each other. Let him call. Since Qin Mo had spoken, Director Huang naturally nodded. Deputy Lu hurriedly reached for the phone. It rang twice before he picked up, but before he could speak, a panicked voice sounded. Deputy Lu, it's bad. The people from the Discipline Inspection Department suddenly barged in, saying that they want to investigate you. Did your bank account outside get exposed? I told you that those women are unreliable, but you didn't listen. Our matter. Wait a minute, you can't touch that. What followed was a buzzing sound. Ka. Qin Mo played with the lighter in his hands, his tone faint. Seems like you have a lot of crimes. Now we have all the evidence. Deputy Lu finally realized what a stupid thing he had done. But why did the discipline inspection team have to come to his lawyer's house at this time? Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? Only Fujio knew that this wasn't a coincidence. The Almighty had always been like this. Every word he said had a purpose. He must have calculated the time and felt that it was about time, so he let Deputy Lu walk into the trap and led him to make that call. If the crime of violating a minor wasn't enough to punish this beast, then add another. So from the start, the Almighty's goal wasn't simply to keep them in prison, but to sentence them to death. Just like that, in front of Deputy Lu, Qin Mo made a call. You don't have to investigate that lawyer anymore. Investigate all the women Lu Igua has been in contact with, especially those with bank accounts. Instantly, Deputy Lu's face turned as white as snow. You. Qin Mo stood up, replying slowly. I'm going to call our director, Director Huang. Director Huang. He had been standing there all along. Take good care of him. Qin Mo wasn't being courteous. When Deputy Lu heard this, he slumped into his chair, completely losing the domineering aura he had before. Chapter 588. Deputy Lu had never seen someone who could communicate with the Commission for Discipline Inspection and command the entire police station. He was confident in his understanding of the police process. Moreover, he knew that with his status, no one would do anything to him. However, the other party had played such a trick on him. It was really unexpected. He was still waiting to use his connections. At the very least, if he had a good relationship, even if he lost his high position now, he could still go back to a small county and be a local tyrant. He had been afraid of being exposed, which was why he had placed all the money he had embezzled over the years on the periphery. Now that it was exposed, Deputy Lu clenched his fists, his eyes bloodshot. He glared at Qin Mo, wanting an answer. But Qin Mo didn't even turn back. He only said, "The person who will send you to hell." Deputy Lu's body trembled. He had never imagined that he would end up like this. Because to him, sleeping with a high school student wasn't a big deal. Even if the other party didn't agree, they could discuss it later. Moreover, with his position, who would dare to cause trouble? But why was it different this time? The other Chief Zhang had the same thoughts as him. Perhaps that was the reality. It was easy for those with power to get a girl. Chief Zhang was an example. In reality, even if he didn't force anyone, there would still be many girls who wanted to be with him. There were many young models among them. But Chief Zhang felt that he had a high moral character and wasn't willing to sleep with those girls. He liked pure girls. At the start, he had indeed spent money to buy them. After all, some high school students were more open-minded. As long as the money was sufficient, there wouldn't be a problem. But later on, the more he slept with them, the more he felt that the girls who rejected him were truly beautiful. Hence, he slept with them for a few days. In the past, there had never been any major incidents. Oh right, there was only one. At that time, he was having too much fun when he slept, and he played too much, so he accidentally made the other party miserable. She had an older brother who had been causing trouble. At that time, he had been climbing up and couldn't afford to have any problems with his style. Hence, he had gotten a group of people to smash her fruit stall. It was said that her brother's leg had been broken. But he didn't care. As long as no one died and it served as a warning, it was enough. But this time, why did the police dare to barge in? Chief Zhang was much smarter than Deputy Liu. His attitude toward admitting his mistake was very good. And even his words were tactful. I did not follow the standard of leading by example, and I blame myself. I am willing to compensate the victims. But there is one thing that I wish for the police to be fair to me. I did not force anyone. I just made a mistake that any normal man would make. I did not resist the temptation and should not have engaged in this kind of business. That's right, the hardest thing to deal with was this excuse of his. In terms of shamelessness, we are usually not as shameless as these men. When he lowered his eyes, he was still saying, I'm willing to accept this complaint, but I'm very clear that I've paid for it. I understand the difference in nature. If that's the case, why would the victim have a knife? Can't you see that she doesn't want to? Chapter 589. He was changing the nature of the entire incident. Since the incident couldn't be denied, he wanted to change the nature of the incident. That way, the sentence would be light. Everyone who knew the law knew Chief Zhang's intentions. Perhaps, that was why Motherly hadn't filed a lawsuit. She was afraid of powerful people who knew the law. They knew when and where to find people from which department to do what kind of things. In the end, even a very big matter might disappear due to a lack of evidence. That wasn't the scariest thing. But when it came to court, the female would be the target of all sorts of speculations. For example, it might be that she wasn't a good person or that she had received money, since there were examples of such cases. In that case, the victim would become the seller. No mother would be willing to let her daughter endure such things. Because she was aware of how shameless some people could be. They could turn black into white. Qin Mo listened to the conversation, glancing at Fujio. Did Li Mengran receive money from the other party? No, but Fujio knew where the problem lay. Yangming's tablet is still with Motherly. She said it was for the child to learn better, hence the practice questions. Qin Mo continued to watch the youngster. Fujio's fingers moved slightly. The tablet is the latest model. It costs more than 6,000 yuan. Got it. Qin Mo's tone was calm. A fatal piece of evidence during the court hearing. Chief Zhang can say it's the transaction fee. Fujio glanced over. Ordinary people wouldn't think it's a trap. Qin Mo didn't speak. The two of them just stood there, tall and slender. Suddenly, they spoke at the same time. That would depend on who bought the tablet. I need a laptop to check on the buyer. Director Huang, who was standing by the side, was taken aback by their tacit understanding. The silver-haired youngster smiled faintly, extending his right hand. Qin Mo cooperated, his lips curving upwards. The two of them exchanged glances, high-fiving handsomely. Director Huang. Why did he feel as though he was useless? He couldn't help but ask Qin Mo. Qin Mo raised his hand and glanced at his wrist, nonchalant. There are, for example, can you order a meal for us? We don't want ordinary takeaway. We can't get used to gutter oil. Order from Gourmet Mountain. Gourmet Mountain. Director Huang's eyes widened. Can't you eat something so expensive? Qin Mo arched a brow. Is it expensive? Director Huang stated his stance. I'm an upright official. The basic salary is enough for 3 meals. Qin Mo patted his shoulder. Director Huang. Why did he have to find such a person to solve the case? Just 1 meal had cost him 10 days' worth of salary. Fujio also stood over. Think about the reporters outside. They are waiting for the case to be closed. Wait a minute. Chinemo patted my shoulder because he was familiar with me. What was the meaning of this overly handsome guy patting my shoulder as well? I am a bureau chief. At this time, no one cared whether he was the bureau chief or not. They wanted to find the most useful evidence in the shortest time possible. That was what Chinemo and Fujio thought. One of them wrote down the key points of the evidence, while the other took a notebook and sat together in the director's office. The reporters outside were still interviewing the police officers. Chapter 590. Wu Jin saw the two of them go in together. But Director Huang had ordered that no one was allowed near his office, so Wu Jin could only watch from outside. Therefore, Wu Jin could only watch from the outside. That feeling made her feel terrible. She had thought that she could use Z's information to get that person back into the crime squad, so that they could fight side by side. That was what she wanted the most. She had even chosen this profession just to be closer to that person. But now Fujio had popped up. The reason why he didn't let anyone near his office was because he didn't want anyone to know that the youngster's hacking skills had reached the pinnacle. The network attack during the selection contest wasn't much. It was the ability to break through the security network and retrieve all of Yang Ming's transaction records that was fatal. If anyone saw the youngster, they would know. It was inevitable that someone would link the live broadcast to Fujio. It was enough that Director Huang knew about it. Chinemo didn't trust anyone else. Both of them were busy. Only the rustling of pens and the crisp sound of keyboards could be heard in the office. In the past, Fujio would never have thought that one day she would work together with her nemesis who had almost caught her. Once they worked together, Fujio realized that everything went smoothly. She didn't need to think about the minor details. The Almighty seemed to be better at logical things than she was. She just needed to use her hacking skills. In the past, she only needed to break into two places to retrieve a person's spending records. One was the assets under the person's name and the corresponding bank. Then she could look for information on his credit card. It was common sense that not many people would use cash to buy an electronic product that costs more than 6,000 yuan. But now there was Alipay and WeChat. Hence, Fujio needed to break into two trading platforms at once. The food had been sent in. Director Huang personally carried 4 dishes and a soup into the office. There were both meat and vegetables, which whetted one's appetite. Actually, Chinemo wasn't that particular at times like this. But now that he had the youngster, he was still growing. Hence, Chinemo wasn't careless when it came to food. After writing down the last key point, he put down his pen and glanced at the youngster in front of the computer. His slender and fair fingers were still typing quickly, and his eyes did not move away from the screen. The facilities in the director's office were not bad. Chinemo first went to the bathroom to wash his hands, then glanced at the young man. Seeing that Fujio was still in the same state, he bent down and opened the lunchbox that belonged to the young man. Director Huang watched from the side, muttering in his heart. When did Chinemo learn how to take care of others? Wasn't he a pampered young master? Director Huang was well aware of Chinemo's misophobia. Let's eat first, Chinemo said. I'm busy. Fujio didn't even raise her head. Her silver hair fell down, and her eyes were fixed on the displayed code. Director Huang's eyes lit up. This little rascal was impressive. He actually rejected Chinemo's care. Not bad, not bad. If such a person entered the police station, there would be people who wouldn't be afraid of Chinemo. Awesome. But that wasn't what surprised him the most. After eating a few mouthfuls of food, Chinemo shifted his chair over. His gaze swept over the screen, and then he looked at the youngster's tightly pursed lips. Chapter 591. Fujio, who was focused on the network attack, didn't know what it was. She opened her mouth subconsciously and didn't reject him at all. She even muttered to herself, break into this trading platform, and all his accounts will be exposed. First, we have to avoid their firewall, then plant a virus in them, and try not to be discovered when we retreat. MMH. Chinemo replied as he handed the youngster another mouthful of rice. Director Huang was dumbfounded. What was going on? Fujiu opened her mouth without hesitation and chewed 2 mouthfuls. She looked like a cat that was being fed. Even with her noble bloodline, she still looked adorable. Qin Mo's lips curled up a little. Just like that, he ate a mouthful and fed the youngster a mouthful. That handsome side profile didn't seem out of place. Director Huang really wanted to yell at this person. Hey, I'm still here. Can't you pay attention? Something wasn't right. Why did he feel like he had discovered a huge secret? Even if Qin Mo had introduced him as his younger brother, Qin Mo wouldn't be able to recognize him. Fine, he would just treat him as his little brother. He never knew that Qin Mo had a brother complex. Director Huang's mind was in a mess. He wanted to squat in a corner and smoke a cigarette to calm himself down. But that overly handsome silver-haired youngster lifted his eyes. Found it. That tablet is under Yang Ming's name and has nothing to do with that Zhang guy. He bought it last year before he came to number 1 middle school. Before Fujiu could finish her sentence, she saw a piece of tender beef appear in front of her lips. The closest thing to her line of sight was Qin Mo's face, which was as abstinent as a god's. For a moment, she felt like she was being bewitched. After Fujiu opened her mouth, she realized that she had naturally eaten the food that the Almighty fed her. For the first time in her life, she experienced what it meant to be a feast for the eyes. She also discovered the Almighty's new skill, which allowed him to feed her when she was busy. The main thing was that the Almighty's face was so good that she could eat an extra bowl of rice. Qin Mo saw that the youngster didn't reject the feeding, and there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. It seemed like this method of turning him gay was very effective. Since it doesn't belong to Zhang Huaqiang, it can't be used as evidence. Moreover, they didn't buy it at the same time, so it's even more impossible for them to turn the tables. Fujiu nodded and didn't forget to chew on the rice. Qin Mo passed the chopsticks in his hand over, his voice deep and pleasant. Finish your meal, we're going to teach Chief Zhang a lesson. All right. Fujiu sat on the chair and smiled. The way she ate with her head tilted could not be more obedient. Director Huang only wanted to say one thing. Qin Mo, young Master Qin. Your brother is done with his work and his hands are free. You really don't need to continue feeding him. Fujiu also noticed this problem, and she reached for her chopsticks. Brother Mo, I'll eat by myself. I eat faster. It's gone. Qin Mo put down the lunchbox, his voice calm. Fujiu took a look, and it was indeed empty. The Almighty probably felt that it was too troublesome to pass the last 2 chopsticks to her, so he simply gave them to her. The Almighty definitely wanted to end this quickly and didn't want to waste time on eating. As expected, his worldview was upright. One had to admit that someone had really misunderstood Almighty Qin this time. Chapter 592. Director Huang had just calmed down after being forced to feed a huge bowl of dog and wolf. He decided to treat himself with food. After all, that was 10 days of his salary. But before he could pick up his chopsticks, Qin Mo had already stood up. He tidied his clothes and said slowly, Director Huang, let's go. Director Huang held a cauliflower in his mouth, looking confused. I've already opened my lunchbox and you're telling me we're leaving. Can you even do that? The youngster watched Director Huang's expression and walked over, patting his shoulder. Director Huang. These 2 rascals, they even bullied him so tacitly. In the interrogation room, Director Zhang was still thinking about his next step. He had already thought of a backup plan. As long as he insisted that the other party had accepted his money, the person who would be suppressing the matter wouldn't be him, but the other party. Girls cared about their reputation the most. Besides, the other party was a high school student. There were many more things to consider. Even if the girl wasn't clear about it, her parents would be. Hence, Director Zhang wasn't worried about the victim's rebuttal. All of this was thanks to the girls who had accepted his money before. With the former, the nature of the matter had changed. Director Zhang lowered his lids. Even though his political career would be greatly affected, it didn't matter. After a few years, when no one paid attention to this matter, the topic would naturally die down. When that time came, he could borrow the power of his father-in-law's family to regroup. It wasn't impossible. In the end, it still depended on the influence of the media. The reason why Director Zhang sat still was because he believed there would definitely be some people here who would speak up for him. Otherwise, if he were to fall, the interests of that group of people would also be affected. Some time passed. The police station was surrounded by many interviewers. They could clearly see some anchors holding microphones, facing the camera and saying something. Director Huang, the reporters outside are asking for information, saying that they want to know if the news on the internet is true. Before he could finish his sentence, the reporters rushed in, raising their microphones in front of Director Huang, not giving him a chance to react. There are so many girls in this industry. Shouldn't we start from within the school to improve the students' morals? Besides, our station is suspecting that the live stream on the internet is a publicity stunt. The girl with the knife hasn't shown her face yet. If she was really wronged, why didn't she say anything? At the very least, she should have shown her face. What is she afraid of? Is she afraid that her lies will be exposed? The reporters came so fast that they almost got a photo of the two of them. It had to be said that these two people were indeed very skilled. With a flash, they stuck themselves to the walls on the left and right at the same time. Both of them were as handsome as ever. Director Huang's rotund body was suitable as a cover, but his brows furrowed when he heard the reporter's question. We are still in the process of confirming the matter. Please stop your guesses. Chapter 593. We will try our best to contact the girl in the video who claims to be the victim. Of course, whether she is innocent or not will depend on the final outcome. Director Huang's chest heaved with anger. Didn't these people learn Chinese? Didn't they understand what he meant? Why did they have to twist his words? In reality, how could the reporters not understand him? But what exactly did the audience want to see? The truth? No. What they wanted to see was one reversal after another. The more unexpected it was, the more attention it would garner. To the media, the most important thing was how to grasp the topic. Besides, their station had sent out a vague message to create words that were beneficial to Director Zhang. They couldn't possibly go against their leader's wishes. Upon seeing this, Fujiu and Qin Mo exchanged glances. Both of them were smart enough to see through the trickery. When Director Huang appeared again, he was fuming with anger and sweat. His lips were dry from speaking too much, and his clothes were wrinkled from being squeezed. It wasn't easy for him to escape, but when he saw that the two youngsters were still clean like the rich kids in the comics, he felt even more stifled. But no matter how stifled he was, he still had to get down to business. The public opinion isn't in favor of the victims. Director Huang was concise. Some of them were willing, and quite a few of them. In the end, it's all because of the name list provided by Z. Unlike Qin Mo, who already knew about this, Fujiu arched a brow. When Fujiu heard this, she arched a brow. What name list? Some girls who would cling on to rich men. There were also high school students who were with Zhang, and many of them were willing. Now the other party is using this point to reverse the situation. And the media is using this as a new topic. If the incident hadn't been exposed, everything would have been much easier to solve. This Z is really. Is she helping Zhang? She isn't helping Zhang. She just hates those girls more than this one. Qin Mo's voice was calm, without any special emotions. Fujiu listened by the side, her eyes dimming. No one knew what she was thinking. Director Huang rubbed his throbbing temples. This matter is getting more and more difficult. There's nothing difficult about it. Qin Mo turned, his face handsome. Call for a press conference. Invite the mainstream media in Jiang City. Twist the public opinion. Director Huang widened his eyes. How? I'll tell you what to say. Qin Mo had one hand in his pocket. Send the notice. Director Huang wanted to glare again. Who exactly was the director? As soon as they heard that there was going to be a press conference, almost everyone with cameras came to the scene. Director Huang stood there, exuding his authority. Qin Mo didn't need to teach him that. If you have any questions, you can ask them one by one. However, there is one thing you must report truthfully. If any media outlet interferes with their own speculations, I have the right to suspect that they are covering up for someone or plagiarizing the topic. Regardless of the situation, I will issue an arrest warrant. As soon as he said this, there were at least 3 reporters who had already edited the headlines out of the document. Director Huang arched a brow. Let's enter the official Q&A session. Chapter 594. The victim's condition isn't stable. Director Huang stared straight into the camera. I hope everyone can give the victim some privacy. No one is willing to go through such a thing. That person wasn't satisfied with the answer. Director Huang, you haven't announced the outcome of the lawsuit. Since this happened, shouldn't you be seeking justice? That's right, the victim wishes for justice. After Director Huang finished his sentence, he changed the topic. But after the police's investigation, it wasn't just about the victim. It has implicated a higher level, so this case will be officially turned into a public prosecution. Public prosecution. A reporter stood up. Which means the victim doesn't intend to press charges? As expected, there was more to it than meets the eye. Director Huang, can the police confirm that the victim didn't receive any financial support? If not, anyone would be able to imagine that even if she needed tuition, she wouldn't have gone to a place like Pure Color. How low was the girl's IQ? She must have known it wasn't a normal place. Why didn't she reject it from the start, and even sat in the teacher's car? How could this be explained? It was obvious the reporter came prepared. Every question she asked pointed to one thing. From the beginning, the girl knew what kind of appointment she was going to attend, but she still went. If it wasn't voluntary, then what was it? To Li Mengran, this was a fatal flaw. If she couldn't answer this question, she would lose the entire game. In the future, no matter where Li Mengran went, people would say that she wasn't a good person, and so was the official, one selling and the other buying. In reality, was that really the case? It wasn't. But a person's heart was like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. People often said that knives couldn't kill. Those with immoral mouths were the real chopsticks. There were too many examples like this. More and more people were obsessed with their own guesses, even thinking that they were the rational ones. Those kind-hearted people were all white lotuses, using their evil hearts to figure out the situation. Then they started to wantonly stir up public opinion. They questioned why the victim did not come forward, questioned the motive of the girl at that time, and even directly said that the girl's motive was not pure at that time, and that she wanted money. The reason why those close to Chief Zhang dared to let the reporters do this was because they knew that there were too many keyboard warriors on the internet who could uphold justice for them. So many questions had given them a chance to turn the tables. The keyboard warriors still thought so. After all, they were smart enough to look at things. Yes, they were indeed smart. They even thought deeply about things and guessed that the victim already knew what the appointment was. However, they had lost the most fundamental part of being human. That was human nature. Their cleverness was built on the pain of a girl. When these questions were asked one by one, the girl who shouldn't have to bear the pressure the most was bearing these words that scared her. Director Huang stood there, his expression ugly. The reporter smirked. Director Huang, is this question that hard to answer? Director Huang clenched his fists, trying his best to remind himself that he was still a director. He couldn't just jump over and smash the other party to death. Just when the reporter thought that everything was settled. Chapter 595. Hearing that, everyone lifted their eyes and looked in the same direction. Fu Jiu was among them. Almighty Qin, who had never been willing to be interviewed by the media, walked up to the reporter just like that. In an instant, the whole place fell into silence. It was as if there was only that tall and handsome man left in the whole world. After a second's pause, some of the media started taking photos like crazy. That reporter didn't understand what was going on. After all, she never cared about esports. But this didn't affect the people around her. This was really an unexpected gain for them. No one thought that they would see Almighty Qin here. However, Qin Mo just stood there with one hand in his pocket and looked at that reporter indifferently. If your boss threatened to fire you and make you unable to survive in this industry, or even the whole of Jiang City, and asked you to have a meal with him, would you go? That reporter was about to open her mouth, but Chinemo interrupted her. It's impossible that you wouldn't go. After all, you are trying your best to find the headlines, which is enough to show that your bottom line is lower than ordinary people. The reporter wants to go crazy. Chinmo's handsome face was still very indifferent. Of course, this topic has always been harsh on women. I'm not a woman, but I understand that when women work, they face more problems than men. After overcoming so many problems, I can't just leave because of something like this. After all, life has to go on. Some women need this job. Whether it's in the pantry or when discussing clients, when they encounter harassment like this, even adults will want to endure it. This is because people who understand you will comfort you or help you vent your anger, but what will others think of you? If your boss harasses you, some colleagues will say that you usually dress too brightly. If a client harasses you, there will also be people who will say that you went to that kind of dinner because you wanted to close the deal. Since adults can weigh whether this matter is worth making a big deal out of, let alone a high school student. If you ask her why she doesn't come out and sue, what will the result of her suing is that people like you will use her as a headline, a topic for people to talk about. Fujio kept looking at that person. It turned out that there was such a kind of person in the world. Usually he didn't talk much. But after this incident, every word he said hit the nail on the head. This had nothing to do with his looks. It was purely his temperament. That tall and straight back that could almost emit light. She wanted to carry him home no matter how she looked at him. Fujio looked down and whistled with a faint smile. Chapter 596. Everyone here has a mother, some have an elder sister or even a daughter. I believe that anyone with a bit of courage wouldn't want their loved ones to be doubted after such an incident. With that, Chinemo paused and lifted his lids. It was that handsome face that could overwhelm all living things. It's time to give justice to those who want to speak up but don't have the strength to. In that instant, the entire atmosphere of the scene changed. No one asked any more questions, because there was no need for any. After being in the industry for so many years, some of them might have lost too much of their conscience for the sake of gossip. But at the end of the day, they were still human. If they didn't give justice to the girl today, in the future, if their daughters encountered the same thing, would they be treated the same way? More than half of the people put down their microphones and cameras. Only a few people who had connections with Chief Zhang didn't dare to speak anymore. Because the reporter who asked the question just now was an example. Everyone was looking at her. That gaze seemed to be saying, "You don't deserve to be a reporter." That reporter's face turned pale. She didn't expect to be slapped in the face like this. At this moment, everyone was extremely clear. Chinmo's words had the effect of turning the tide. Fujio also retracted her previous thoughts. Persuasiveness and appearance were definitely linked. For example, the Almighty. Even if he just stood there and didn't say a word, she would still want to bring him home. In a trance, she remembered after that person left. She locked herself in her room and hugged that person's favorite stuffed animal, telling herself, be a hacker who can save people. Yes, save people. In fact, she wasn't that kind. But that was the trust that had supported her to this day. And now, she found that she trusted the same person as she did. That was why she didn't want to be enemies with the Almighty. They were in different camps. But that didn't affect her admiration for the Almighty. Fujio even wanted to drug the Almighty and carry him back to Fifth Avenue. But with the Almighty's skills, what if he got angry after waking up? Fujio raised her eyebrows in pity. She glanced sideways and met Wu Zhen's gaze. Wu Zhen was looking at Fujio. Her eyes dimmed. Although she quickly smiled at her, it didn't seem sincere. Then, she slowly walked towards Fujio. Fujio stuffed one hand into her trouser pocket, her eyes unchanging. Wu Zhen glanced in Chinmo's direction before whispering to Fujio, "Brother Mo is handsome, right?" "Yes, very handsome." Fujio held the lollipop in her mouth without any change in her expression. Wu Zhen suddenly felt that the other party was harder to deal with than she had imagined. But it did not matter. She liked to get straight to the point. "I heard your fans like to talk about you and Brother Mo together." Fujio glanced at her and didn't say anything. Chapter 597. Hearing that, Fujio smiled. He lifted his chin slowly, stuffing one hand into his pocket as he approached Wu Jun. Officer Wu, your advice is too late. I'm very interested in him now. All of a sudden, Wu Jun's face stiffened. She looked at the youngster in front of her, and her eyes dimmed. This Fujio, did he not know who she was? That's a pity. Wu Jun wasn't annoyed. I originally wanted to get along well with Brother Mo's brothers, but now it seems difficult. Fujio unwrapped another lollipop and only gave him 2 words. Up to you. Because of the youngster's attitude, Wu Jun was even angrier. She clenched her fists. After all, no one had ever talked to her like that, and it was obvious that Fujio didn't know what was good for her. But she didn't continue, and instead, a faint smile appeared on her lips. It wasn't because of anything else, but because Qin Emo had finished speaking and was walking towards them. Wu Jun had never interfered with his life in front of Qin Emo, and she had always been natural and unrestrained. For example, in high school, when she saw some victims getting close to Qin Emo because of a case, no matter how jealous she was, she wouldn't do anything in front of Qin Emo, because Wu Jun knew that once that person realized her thoughts, he would definitely be disgusted with her. Wu Jun knew when to step back. After seeing Qin Emo, she immediately said, Brother Emo, that Chief Zhang's lawyer is here. He's right behind us, do you want to meet him? No need. Qin Mo's tone was indifferent, and he didn't even look at Wu Jun. He reached out and pulled the youngster over, walking towards the deepest part of the room. There were many reporters behind the 2 of them. But Qin Emo didn't care. He lowered his voice and said slowly in Fujio's ear, Did you forget what I said again? Do you believe that I'll lock you up if you continue to flirt? Brother Emo, you've really wronged me this time. Fujio laughed lightly. I've never been interested in the police, especially someone like Miss Wu. Hearing that, Qin Emo raised his eyebrows, but he didn't let go of the youngster. Instead, he brought Fujio into the interrogation room. Wu Jun, who had been ignored, felt a sense of jealousy that she had never felt before. He was just taking advantage of the fact that he was a boy and a member of the Supreme Alliance, which made it easier for him to get close to that person. That was why he dared to speak to her like that. After all, Brother Emma wouldn't be so guarded against a boy. Wu Jun narrowed her eyes. It seemed like she needed to investigate this Fujio. She couldn't stand the fact that Brother Emo had such a scheming boy by his side. Meanwhile, Chief Zhang, who was sitting in the interrogation room, had already received news of his lawyer's arrival. This was undoubtedly good news. The appearance of the lawyer meant that the situation had been reversed. Chief Zhang still trusted his business partners. It was easy to make use of the public speculations to create public opinion. Even if Chief Zhang didn't step out, he could imagine that everyone's attention had already shifted from him to the girl. There would definitely be questions. In this way, the pressure on his side would be reduced. Perhaps in the end, he would only be judged for his style of work and demoted to repent. Chapter 598. That girl was even more confused. She had allowed him to sleep with her. No one would be at a disadvantage. But this was the way to resolve it. She was really looking for trouble. He had said that no one could control him, but she hadn't believed him. Now that girl had to pay the price for her insolence. Chief Zhang straightened his clothes. He had expected to see his lawyer when he opened the door again, but he hadn't expected to see him. Unexpectedly, it was the young Master Qin they had wanted to talk to when they first arrived in Jiang City. In the next second, Chief Zhang stood up. But before he could greet him, the policeman who followed him unlocked his wrists. What are you doing? Chief Zhang's eyes narrowed at the sudden turn of events. Qin Emo stood there, his voice calm. Of course we are bringing Chief Zhang to court. Court? Chief Zhang lifted his head abruptly. I can go to court, but I have to meet my lawyer. Qin Emo glanced at him, tilting his head as he lit his cigarette. If Chief Zhang wants to tell your lawyer that the girls you hurt took your money and willingly had sex with you, you don't have to go through this process. The livestream video and the police investigation have already confirmed Chief Zhang's crimes. It also proved that the victims didn't receive any benefits and were forced. You can try to defend yourself and tell the judge, but I'm not going to let you off the hook. When Chief Zhang heard this, his expression changed. No, that wasn't how things should be. The public opinion should have been directed. The police shouldn't have decided on his crimes so quickly. I want to make a call. Chief Zhang shouted at the people beside him. The few policemen glanced at Qin Mo arched a brow. Chief Zhang, you want to call Chief Li? The disciplinary officer should be there by now. In half an hour he will accompany you to the trial and explain how he helped you create public opinion to cover up your crimes. Chief Zhang had been full of confidence previously, but now he was paralyzed. As the head of the bureau, he knew very well that there was a fundamental difference between sex power transactions and controlling public opinion. The country couldn't tolerate the latter. Once he broke the law, no one could save him. No, he couldn't think that way. Nothing had been decided. He had instructed Tang how to give every child some benefits. As long as he bit down on this point, he would be able to survive. However, when the police produced the bill, not only was Chief Zhang dumbfounded, even his lawyer knew he was going to lose this case. Chief Zhang's wife was still trying to find connections, but she realized that none of the people she usually played cards with were picking up her calls. Not only that, even her maiden family had been targeted by the Discipline Inspection Department. She had no choice but to beg for help. A hot-blooded senior Red Army soldier even said, "Don't shoot this kind of bastard. It's not enough to vent our anger, and you're here to plead for him? Let me say this, whoever dares to fish up this beast will be the next one to be dealt with." The funniest thing was that she even begged the Qin family. General Qin didn't even see her. He put down the phone that he had just played a game on and said to his adjutant, "Go out and tell Mrs. Zhang who is in charge of this case." Yes. Adjutant Li retreated. When Mrs. Zhang saw Adjutant Li coming out, she was filled with hope. Chapter 599. Movie Queen walked out, glancing outside before asking Admiral Qin, "What is she here for?" "She wants to plead for our son." As General Qin spoke, he stretched out his hand and pulled the man over. Movie Queen shook her head solemnly. "There's no hope for her. Our son doesn't care about relationships." "Oh right, how's your gaming practice going?" "A little more." Admiral Qin pretended to be troubled. "I can't use my skills properly." At this moment, Deputy Li had returned. As it turned out, Adjutant Li was a good adjutant who understood the thoughts of his superior. He didn't mention anything about the boss killing 3 people in one go in the game. Instead, he wisely retreated to the living room. Movie Queen sat down the moment she heard Admiral Qin's words, exuding the aura of an expert. "I'll teach you." "All right." General Qin replied calmly. He wanted to change the method. Sometimes, games weren't necessarily a bad thing. However, Movie Queen's next sentence made him unhappy. "Once you've mastered it, I'll get Jio to carry us." "Jio? The one who often carries you in the game?" Admiral Qin asked calmly. Movie Queen nodded as she swiped the screen. Admiral Qin arched a brow. It seemed like he had to find a chance to meet Jio in the game. Fu Jio had no idea she was being watched by Admiral Qin. The moment the news of the trial came out, she called Li Mengran. Life imprisonment, just like what the Almighty said, they won't be able to leave the prison for the rest of their lives. Li Mengran didn't know how to describe the feeling. She had been sitting in front of the television, watching the news. When so many people questioned her on why she hadn't stepped out, her heart had turned cold. But the moment Almighty Qin stepped out, she couldn't care less. She no longer cared about the outcome of the 2 beasts. Li Mengran laughed lightly. "Your Highness Jio, you guys are really alike." "Us?" Fu Jio arched a brow. Li Mengran glanced at the ceiling. "You and Almighty Qin, you guys are really alike. At the start, I even thought of dying. I kept posting on the forums. The only reason I was able to persevere for so long was because of what you said in front of the camera. I'm glad I've seen your justice. You weren't brave enough." Fu Jio looked up at the police officers not far away and lowered her voice. Mengran, there's something I want to ask you. What's that forum called? Who else has contacted you on the forum? Li Mengran didn't understand the youngster's question. Almighty Qin has asked me about this. It seems like the police are concerned too. Your Highness Jiao, is there a problem with the forum? I'm just curious why you're so obsessed with a forum. Fu Jiao's explanation was always flawless. Li Mengran lowered her voice. Because there will be people consoling me there, but it's not direct contact. They will reply to my post. I feel safe there, no one knows each other, and I can spill my painful secrets. It's indeed a good place. Fu Jiu narrowed her eyes, and her aura became dangerous. If possible, can you send it to me so that I can have a look? Chapter 600. It's a place to relax. Fu Jiu turned back, her thin lips curling up in a natural manner. After answering Qin Mo's question, she said to the other end of the line, Mengran, I'll hang up first. Remember to send me the exact location. Qin Mo watched as Fu Jiu placed her phone back into her pocket, his gaze deepening. This was the first time he realized that even if the youngster left, he wouldn't be able to control his actions. The National League is in 3 days, yet you're still thinking of a place to relax. Qin Mo's tone was slightly hooked, his entire aura chilling. Seems like I haven't given you enough training. Fu Jiu opened her mouth, but before she could say a word, she was dragged into the sports car. Fu Jiu realized that the Almighty's driving speed was really fast. So fast that she felt as though he was going to crash into something in the next second. Qin Mo's eyes were filled with malice. As soon as he heard the youth say the 2 words Mengran, he couldn't control himself. Qin Mo knew very well that the most difficult thing to forget was first love. But even so, he was still jealous. He was starting to worry that if the youngster couldn't resist looking for Li Mengran again, what would he do? The moment he thought of this, Qin Mo's heart felt as though it was being stung by an invisible force. Pain. That was the only feeling he had. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. In the end, he calmed himself down. And Qin Mo's standard for calming himself down was that he wouldn't give the youngster a chance. You could call him domineering or selfish. He wanted to keep him by his side and slowly break him down. Fu Jiu couldn't understand why the Almighty was looking at her with such a gaze. How should she put it? It was murderous and dangerous. He was probably still angry at her for making a move. At this moment, the phone in her pocket vibrated. Fu Jiu tilted her head to look. There was only one word, redemption. She didn't hesitate, opening the webpage to search for the forum that Li Mengran had sent her. But at this moment, Fu Jiu realized that the forum wasn't accessible to just anyone, it required an invitation code. Fu Jiu was almost 100% sure that there was something wrong with the forum. That was because most forums would open up this function to visitors. But this forum had extremely high requirements for members. This was not normal. Anyone who made a forum on the internet wanted to increase the number of visitors and topics, which was also commonly known as traffic. However, once this kind of restriction was made, it would mean that a large portion of the traffic would be lost. Then how could its profits be high? Even if they needed an invitation code, there would still be a lot of people wanting to join. Fu Jiu knew that there were 2 types of situations. One was that some pornographic forums were afraid of being caught, so they needed this kind of invitation code. The other was the hacker's exclusive forum, which required an invitation code to enter. However, it was obvious that this forum was not one of them. What concerned Fu Jiu the most was that even under such circumstances, the number of visits to the forum was surprisingly high. If it was as Li Mengran had said, everyone here would share their painful secrets here, then the existence of this forum itself was a negative product. Psychologists have long done research. If you are with someone who is depressed, the chances of you becoming depressed are far greater than the chances of that person becoming optimistic. Chapter 601. The moment she saw the forum, Fu Jiu's hands itched to crack it, but with the Almighty beside her, she couldn't do anything. Qin Mo knew the youngster was looking at his phone. But from his angle he could only see the youngster's side profile in his eyes, which were covered by his silver hair. He stared at the screen without replying, as though he couldn't bear to part with her. Was he that reluctant? Chin Emo gripped the steering wheel, swerving to the side of the road, his voice deep. Fujio. The youngster glanced up. I'll give you another chance. Chin Emo tilted his head to light a cigarette, fiddling with the lighter. His gaze wasn't on Fujio. This is the last time. Are you going to choose Lee Mengran or the National League? Fujio didn't hesitate. She wasn't sure why the Almighty would ask such a question. She replied decisively, the National League. Chin Emo tilted his head, emphasizing each word. Then we'll cut off contact and prepare for the competition. All right. Fujio kept her phone. She hadn't agreed to Lee Mengran's matter. She had told herself to stop for the time being. This case had affected her too much, making her forget that other than Z, she was still Fujio. Fujio had friends and family. She had many responsibilities to bear, the most important of which was winning the National League. Chin Emo watched the youngster's face, his gaze sinking. He had given him a chance to escape. Just this once. In the future, even if he couldn't bear to part with her, he wouldn't be soft-hearted. It was time to subtly influence the youngster, telling him how bad girls were, and that finding a boyfriend was the most reliable thing. The third step of turning gay was getting used to it. To get used to it, he had to find a reference. There were plenty of pure young masters. But Chin Emo didn't want the youngster to see it. Firstly, he was worried the youngster wouldn't be able to accept it, and secondly, he was worried the youngster would sense something and hide. Hence, he had to find someone ambiguous. Chin Mo's eyes dimmed, and he turned the car around discreetly. Fujio arched a brow. Brother Emo, where are we going? A university. Chin Mo's voice was calm. It's been a long time since I last played in school. Yunhu and Linfeng shouldn't have any classes. Let's form a team. Hearing that, Fujio's interest was piqued. I heard that those two live in the same dormitory. Are we going to the dormitory to catch them? Immersing, Chin Emo replied. There wasn't any sign of it, but the corners of his lips curved up slightly. As a high school student, Fujio really wanted to go to the university dormitory to have a look. After all, she didn't have that kind of experience in her previous life. As the capital of the country, a university was no different from an ordinary university except for the trees. Some of the buildings were even older than some of the newly built universities, which also symbolized the school's long history. Usually, a university would be especially lazy and quiet at 4 p.m. But today, it was the complete opposite. Ever since Fujio and Chin Emo stepped into the school, the screams hadn't stopped. It was because these two people were too eye-catching. Even though Fujio was wearing a black mask, it couldn't hide her handsomeness. Needless to say, Chin Mo's fingers moved slightly as he walked, sending a message to Yunhu. That handsome and abstinent side profile had already been taken by countless people. Originally, the basketball player on the basketball court wanted to take advantage of Yunhu's break to shoot a three-pointer to attract the cheers of the junior girls. He didn't expect that even after he threw the ball, no one would look at him. Chapter 602. The commotion caused wasn't small. Even Yunhu, who was drinking mineral water, glanced over. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't looked, but after that he understood why the crowd was so crazy. But it was strange. Why did Captain want to come to a university? The moment Yunhu stood up, the person behind him threw the basketball in his hand. Young Master Yin, where are you going? Just say it if you're afraid. What he had said. Yunhu wasn't the only one who heard it. The surrounding audience could hear it too. Of course, that included Fujio and Chin Emo. The two of them weren't seated. One was wearing a black mask while the other had a hand in his pocket. They stood there, tall and slender, arching their brows. The man didn't notice the subtle atmosphere. Instead, he took a step forward and pointed. Since you chose to major in programming, you should be a good otaku. What's so great about playing games? Don't go around seducing girls just because you're handsome, understand? Yunhu glanced back looking at him. I don't understand. You. The person scoffed. You won't listen to my advice? Then let's fight on the court. What's the meaning of not going on the court? Yinhu gave him a dumb *SS look, continuing to walk forward, as though he was saying that he didn't want to go on the court because he wasn't worthy. The person was infuriated, his eyes narrowing. I think you only know how to follow behind Lin Feng. Are you having fun being gay? With that, Yinhu placed his backpack down, his gaze icy. Why? You want to hit me? The person slapped his face, inching closer to Yinhu. Go ahead, if you hit me, you can forget about attending the National League. You'll be happy even if you're banned, right? Peng? Before the person could finish his sentence. Then a basketball flew over from the audience's seats. It landed squarely on his knee. He was in so much pain that his face changed. He hugged his leg and screamed, "Damn it! Who is it?" As he spoke, he glanced in the direction of the basketball. The silver-haired youngster stood in the crowd, brushing his black mask, his gaze dark. Sorry, my hand slipped. You. The person wanted to rush over. Another basketball flew over. This time, it wasn't his leg that was hit, but his face. Bang. That person fell backward with a thud. The dizziness in front of his eyes was simply too much. His hand touched his nose, a red. Damn it. Who was it this time? The moment the man sat up, Yi Zichen looked at him. The main culprit, Qin Mo, had already walked to his side. He said faintly, "My hand is slippery too. People who play games usually have slippery hands." You guys. That person was about to curse. Yinhu tugged his jacket. Didn't you want to pick? Come on. The surrounding people knew that Yinhu was going to be angry today. Actually, Yinhu had already mentioned that he wouldn't be playing during this period of time because the National League was around the corner. He didn't want any accidents to happen to his hand. But today this person had obviously touched Yinhu's reverse scale. Brother Hu, we can't do it. Since they were all from the programming department, they were really afraid that these sports students would do something. What's more, with their skills, how could they beat the other team? Softening before the battle even began. Yinhu frowned. Chapter 603. Yinhu's first reaction was to look at Qin Mo. It wasn't a good time to do any sports, especially when the opponent was likely to play blackball. Feng Yi had been reminding them not to get into conflict with others in the heat of the moment. He could play alone and bring Little Spade. If something really happened, Supreme Alliance would lose two main players. But Little Spade had already taken off his jacket, and their captain didn't seem to want to stop him. Yinhu opened his mouth, wanting to remind him. You have never played together before. Qin Mo's voice was calm. Treat basketball as an esports game and practice. Yinhu was smart enough to agree in a low voice. Okay. With Qin Mo's words, Yinhu relaxed. Sometimes, the experience of a team could be accumulated not only from the esports game, but also from the little things. Fu Jiu had already picked up a basketball. Before she went on the court, she decided to tease the Almighty. Brother Mo, do I get a reward if I win? Qin Mo looked at the youngster who was approaching him and suddenly smiled. Of course. Then I'll work harder. Fujio thought that according to the Almighty's character, the reward must be very valuable. She would feel sorry if she didn't win. The troublemaker saw Fujio on the court, rubbed his face and said viciously, "Let's show him what it means to play basketball." Don't worry, he's just a small guy. If I hit him, his whole arm will be broken. Obviously, just as Yinhu had guessed, this wasn't going to be a friendly match. Many people in the audience were already worried about the youngster. Can he really do it? He's so thin. I feel like he'll be sent flying. I think you should worry about whether he can shoot well or not. With his height, he'll be blocked under the basket. That's why senior brother Yin found such a helper. I'm so worried. Swoosh. The crisp sound of the ball kickoff interrupted the whispers of the audience. Both sides snatched the ball. Yinhu's jump gave him an absolute advantage. With a tilt of his hand, he hit the ball to his teammate. Unfortunately, his teammate's technique was so bad that he only ran 3 steps before the ball was knocked away. Trash. As he dribbled, he didn't forget to glance at Yinhu in disdain. Come brothers, let's win this round. Just as he was feeling proud of himself, he saw a figure with a half-bent waist swept past his left side with a swoosh. The figure's speed was very fast, so fast that no one could react, and the ball in their hands was gone. Bastard! That person cursed and quickly retreated to defend. But it was too late. Swoosh! He dribbled the ball perfectly and hit the bullseye. Then, the young man landed on the ground, his silver hair fluttering in the wind, looking indescribably handsome. Instantly, the entire audience was in an uproar. It was too fast. It was too fast. The sports students of a university were not weak. In fact, they were among the best in the university league. The reason why that person often caused trouble for Yunhu was because he had lost to Yunhu in the past. He wanted to pull Yunhu into his team, but he was rejected. Hence, because of this, he couldn't help finding trouble with Yunhu. Every time, he would lose and he wouldn't learn to behave. In the past, Yunhu didn't have anyone to cooperate with him. It would be very strenuous to fight a battle. But today, the situation was obviously different. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.